France under Louis XIV and XV. Louis XIV was born on September 5, 1638, in Paris, France. Louis XIV was known as Louis the Great or the Sun King. He was a monarch of the House of Bourbon and ruled as King of France from 1643 until his death in 1715. The centralizing policies that chief ministers prior to Louis XIV's reign created led to rebellion among the French nobles. During Louis XIV's reign, he had trouble gaining authority with dissatisfied Protestants and a strong noble class. These two chief ministers laid the groundwork for Louis XIV's absolutism. The rebellions were not successful, however, they convinced Louis XIV that policies could potentially destroy his throne. He decided that rather than ruining the local social and political institutions, he would work through them. He concentrated exceptional power in the monarchy, making it the most critical political institution, and he believed that political unity and stability required religious conformity. Years of personal rule. In 1661, the chief minister of France died, and King Louis XIV took control of the French government. He appointed no chief ministers, causing direct protest against himself, the king. Within his rule were many councils that supervised foreign affairs, domestic administration, the army, and economic regulations. The council representatives were made up of the families that had been long in royal service or those who were just becoming a part of the higher social class, rather than the nobility. However, Louis XIV made certain nobility and higher social classes benefited from the growth of his power in the French government. He did this by not abolishing noble institutions while still limiting their influence in the monarchy. The one institution that Louis XIV clashed with was the Parliament of Paris. He decreased its power in 1673 by requiring the Parliament to file laws before questioning them. The Palace of Versailles. Louis XIV was not modest with his royalty, especially around the French nobility. The central image of Louis XIV's monarchy was the Palace of Versailles. He began building it in 1676, and by the time it was finished in 1708, it was the largest secular structure in Europe. Versailles was designed to proclaim the glory of the Sun King and housed nobles, religious officials, as well as servants. This made sure the nobility remained dependent on the monarch. Intricate etiquette governed all life matters, and Louis XIV arranged life courts circled around all details of his routine, emphasizing his eminence. Louis XIV supported the established social system and privileges of French nobility, understanding those who chose not to reside at Versailles. King by divine right. Louis XIV's devout tutor and political theorist defended the divine right of kings, meaning rulers were appointed by God and could only answer to God. He cited this claim by using examples of rulers in the Old Testament and argued that God could judge a king, just as God judged the Pope. Louis XIV declared, "I am the state," assuming that although he had to mirror God's will during his reign as the king, he was one of God's rulers on earth who was not bound to commands of the Parliament or the French nobility. Louis XIV's absolutism was seen in typical areas of European state action, during war and peace, while controlling religion, and while overseeing economic activity. Although he prevented influence from nobility at a national level, he allowed local institutions to retain their authority.
By the late 1660s, France was superior to any other European nation in population, national unity, and army. Because of the economic policies of Jean-Baptiste Colbert, Louis could afford to raise and maintain a large and powerful army. Enemies and later historians claimed that Louis wished to dominate all of Europe, but it would appear that his chief military and foreign policy goal was to achieve secure international boundaries of France. Louis's pursuit of French interests threatened and terrified neighboring states, so they formed an alliance of action against France. In the War of Devolution, Louis supported the alleged rights of his first wife to inherit the Spanish Netherlands, which is present-day Belgium. He argued that through complex legal arrangements, in 1659, King Louis XIV and King Philip IV signed the Treaty of Pyrenees, ending the 24-year war between France and Spain. In 1668, with this treaty, Louis gained control of certain towns bordering the Spanish Netherlands. In 1670, with the secret Treaty of Dover, England and France became allies against the Dutch. In 1672, Louis invaded the Netherlands. The Prince of Orange, the future William III of England, forged an alliance with the Holy Roman Empire, Spain, and other countries against Louis. In 1678 to 1679, the war ended inconclusively with the Peace of Nijmegen, signed by different parties in successive years. By this, France gained more territory, including the Franche-Comté.
The War of Devolution.
Okay, with this Treaty of Pyrenees, I will end our 24-year period of war. You can also marry my daughter, and you get all of Marie's inheritances.
Wow, thank you, Philip IV. I'm so happy that we were able to compromise. Marie, I haven't received my dowry of 500,000 gold coins that your father promised me in our treaty. What do you think happened?
I'm so sorry. It's just our country is really broke because of the wars, so you're not going to get your money. And my father died, so...
Now that your father has died, and I have not yet received my 500,000 French gold coins, I believe that I should inherit the Spanish Netherlands based on our Treaty of Pyrenees. On the other hand, Marie's stepmother, Queen Mariana of Spain, believed that her son, Charles II, should rule the Spanish Netherlands, even though her late husband had created a treaty with France and Louis XIV.
Marie and her French husband should not take over the Spanish Netherlands, my son. It should be yours.
But what if they get mad at me? I'm only a little boy.
If Louis and his wife are angered, then let that be.
Marie, I can't believe what your stepmother did, claiming the Spanish Netherlands to be Charles II, her son.
I knew she never liked me.
You know what? She will regret it. I will strengthen my army. The Spanish army will be outnumbered. She will regret it. On May 24th, 1667, the French forces invaded the Spanish Netherlands. All of the cities in the Spanish Netherlands had their own armies that they commanded, so the French forces had to fight multiple smaller armies rather than one single force. The French army was able to siege and conquer the land that they had desired to obtain in Flanders. France's abrupt success against the weakened Spanish army was shocking to the British and worrisome to the Dutch. After conquering Flanders, I hope to conquer as many territories in the Spanish Netherlands as possible. Next, I will campaign in the Franche-Comté.
Good idea. They'll never expect it. In the last war, we declared it a neutral zone, and we'll be attacking in the winter, so they'll never know it's coming.
Honey, take a look at this letter I just received as I was preparing to travel to the main army. A spy informed me that the Triple Alliance are also planning to battle my strong army.
Oh my! A triple alliance among Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary? Is it because of our powerful army? What do we do?
I guess I will continue to campaign in the Franche-Comté, and these territories may be helpful for future negotiations with other countries. The French army battled the Spanish forces very quickly because the Spanish forces were not prepared at all. Many of the towns even welcomed the French because they understood Louis XIV's situation and reasoning for battle. After 17 days of battling the Spanish forces, Louis XIV occupied all of the Franche-Comté.
Hello. Hi, I have you two here today to discuss my next move. Should I acknowledge the requests of the Triple Alliance, or should I continue conquering territories in the Spanish Netherlands?
I believe you should continue to conquer more territories in the Spanish Netherlands.
I like the sound of that. But what do you think as my finance minister?
I think since Spain's just formed an alliance with Portugal and is getting a lot stronger, we should just sign a treaty since we've already focused enough on
After
wars.
negotiating with all the countries involved, I created a treaty. Unfortunately, I'm only able to keep 12 of the cities that I have conquered.
Thank you. We're so
Jansenism was a 17th century movement within the Catholic Church that taught that human beings were so corrupt by original sin that they could do nothing good nor secure their own salvation. Jansenism was a Roman Catholic religious movement in the 1630s. They were in opposition to the theology and political influence of Jesuits. They also particularly opposed Jesuit teachings about free will and many other things. In 1656, Jansen's Augustinus was banned by Pope Alexander VII. In 1660, Louis permitted the papal bull banning of Jansenism to be enforced in France. They closed down the Port Royal community, and Jansenists were either retracted or their views went underground. By persecuting Jansenists, Louis turned his back on the long tradition of protecting the Gallical liberties of the French Church and fostered within the French Church a core of opposition to royal authority. During the 18th century, after the death of Louis XIV, the Parliament of Paris and other French judicial bodies would reassert to their authority in opposition to the monarchy. These courts were sympathetic to the Jansenists because of their common resistance to royal authority. Jansenism came to embody a set of religious and moral values that contrasted with what the 18th century public opinion saw as the corruption and dishonesty of the mid-18th century French royal court. The Edict of Nantes protected the religious freedoms and civil rights of French Protestants since 1598. Louis secretly married his mistress after the death of his first wife. She was deeply Catholic and drew Louis towards a much more devout religious observance. She also influenced Louis into revoking the Edict of Nantes. Louis launched a campaign against the Huguenots, who are Calvinist Protestants of France, in an effort to unify France religiously. He hounded Huguenots out of public life, banning them from government offices and excluding them from high-class professions. He used financial incentives to encourage them to convert to Catholicism. And then in 1681, he bullied them by quartering troops in their towns. In 1685, Louis officially revoked the Edict of Nantes. By doing so, Protestant churches and schools were closed, Protestant ministers were exiled, and non-converters were condemned to the galley slaves, and Protestant children were baptized by Catholic priests. As a result of revoking the Edict of Nantes and the ongoing persecution of Jansenists, France became a symbol of religious repression, in contrast to England's reputation for moderate, if not complete, religious toleration. Pope Innocent VI opposed Louis revoking the Edict of Nantes. He understood that this act and other aspects of Louis's policy were intended as political measures to allow his government to dominate the Roman Catholic Church in France.
The revocation of the Edict of Nantes.
May I ask you a few questions? I'm having trouble with Protestants in the Edict of Nantes.
Sure, you can ask me anything.
I feel that we should have a more religiously unified France. What do you think?
My dear king,
What is it?
I strongly urge you to revoke the Edict of Nantes. Your only way to achieve your dream of a religiously unified Catholic France is through revoking this edict. There's only one path to God, and that is Catholicism.
I have a plan. I've been launching a campaign against Huguenots that will exclude them from being in the government and holding high-class professions. If these Calvinists convert to Catholicism, I will pay them an endowment. However, if they do not obey my orders, they will have consequences.
Oh, honey, I'm so glad we agree on this issue and that you...
Heard about what the king is campaigning?
No, what did Louis say now?
We all know. He said that none of us Protestants can hold any spots in the government. We can't be doctors or lawyers or anything. What do we do?
Eventually, I think our only choice is to either convert if we want to stay in our homeland of France, or we will be forced to flee. This is not looking good for us.
My campaign has been effective. I believe that the final step is to revoke the Edict of Nantes. This will promote the conversion of Protestants to Catholicism and will strip all Protestants of their religious freedom in France.
League of Augsburg and the 9 Years' War. After the Treaty of Nijmegen, Louis XIV pushed his army into Strasbourg, making alliances form against him. The largest alliance was the League of Augsburg, which included England, Spain, Sweden, United Provinces, and other German states, and it had the support of the Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor Leopold I. Between 1689 and 1697, the League and France battled in the 9 Years' War. The Peace of Ryswick ended the war, secured Holland's borders, and stopped Louis's expansion into Germany. The War of Spanish Succession. Charles II, the King of Spain, died and left his inheritance to Louis XIV's grandson, Philip of Anjou. As a result, it appeared that all of Spain's trade with the American Empire had been given to France. England, Holland, and the Holy Roman Empire formed the Grand Alliance, agreeing with Leopold I's claim that the throne was his son's. In 1701, the War of Spanish Succession began. Louis went into the war without being properly equipped and with poor finances, but the English were very prepared. John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, led the Grand Alliance army, defeating Louis XIV. In 1793 through 1794, France made peace with England, Holland, and the Holy Roman Emperor. Philip V remained the King of Spain, and England gained Gibraltar and the island of Minorca. Louis XIV recognized that the House of Hanover rightfully belonged to the English throne.
The last section we have is France after Louis XIV. So soon after the War of Spanish Succession, Louis XIV died of gangrene on September 1st, 1715. So there were many ways that Louis XIV's rule set up France for a good foundation, and they were able to stay powerful after his death. So the first was they still had the largest European population of all the formed countries. They still had an advanced economy. Even though it wasn't doing great, it was still advanced compared to other countries. They also had structural advancement from Louis's leadership, so he put them in a good spot that they could continue being kind of a leader in Europe. And lastly, all the other countries were already suffering, so even if they weren't doing great, they were doing well and prospering compared to other countries around them. So Louis XIV was replaced by Louis XV, who was his great-grandson, and he was really young at the time, so he had a regency, and the Duke of Orleans ruled alongside him as a regency, and the regency was what kind of continued the downfall of the monarchy in France. So John Law was a Scottish mathematician who was a gambler, and the Duke of Orleans, during his regency, was also a gambler, and he liked the idea of different philosophies in financial matters that most people wouldn't take. So he handed off all the financial matters off to John Law. So Law believed that printing more money, more paper money, would cause an economic recovery. So that's what he did. He established a bank that printed paper money, and it also controlled all trade with Louisiana in the United States, which wasn't the United States yet, and he created a monopoly, basically. So it was called the Mississippi Company, and that's why this section is called the Mississippi Bubble. So he sold shares of stock in his company in exchange for government bonds. So people would buy stock, and then they would get bonds in the government that would help the economy. So when stock prices rose in 1719, a lot of the investors, at least the smart ones, sold their stock back for paper money, and then they took that paper money to the bank and wanted to exchange it for gold, and then the bank ran out of gold. So he was very ashamed, and they couldn't get anything for their money, and it brought shame on the government as well, because the Duke of Orleans had appointed this guy and he just messed it all up, blah blah blah, whatever. So it brought shame on the government, and then he fled from France. So that was the first mistake that the Duke of Orleans made. So his second mistake was that he continued to try to include nobility in governmental decisions. So he made councils where nobles and bureaucrats served at the same time, and they were forced to work together. And the Treaty of Versailles had caused nobles to not really want to govern. They didn't really feel like it. They didn't really have the motivation for it. So not much got done in the councils. And then he continued to reapprove the full power of Parliament to veto laws.
So this shifted a lot of the public into resisting the monarchy, which is not what he meant to do, but that's kind of what he did. And Parliament became the center of a mindset of not liking the monarchy. So these two mistakes that he made significantly contributed to the fall of the monarchy.